Namaste and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology Debunking Mythology. Sat means truth, Logos means the study of science, Sattology means science of truth and study of truth. Mythology is a true antonym of Sattology, which means the science of myth. Myth is a Sanskrit word which is fake, lie, or imagination. Like we always use the word myth, why you're spreading myths, right? So mythology is the science of myth, study of myth. Can you believe that you can take it seriously anytime? You by the word is telling you that you are discussing something imaginary. And this word mythology was invented specially for India. Later on, it was used for entire all the native cultures of the planet, as if they had no culture. In fact, you'll be shocked to know that we live in USA, North America. We do not find a single Native American temple which we can reference as their historical heritage, which is a loss for us because we cannot find our roots here. And many of the people who complain about it. By the way, if you want to see the Native American culture, you have to cross the border south, go to Yucatan in Mexico and see what they used to think like, or even go to Tijuana or many other places. They have done some good work in preserving those places at least. I have a very, very special guest, the founder of Yoga Factory of Pittsburgh, one of the preeminent teachers of yoga in this country, and also has set a very high benchmark on the yoga practice personally. Without delay, let us welcome Zeb Homison.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing well, doing well. We can always say, whatever Krishna wants to make it happen, we're doing it. So, so Zeb, we discussed many topics, and thank you for coming on the gala dinner. You gave a wonderful speech that day.
Thank you so much. It was
And
my
your
pleasure.
last video went viral, literally. So today's topic we want to a little bit cover. We did cover a little bit some aspects of mythology in the past, and asanas we discussed in the last show. Today we want to go a little bit further on the kriya or the karma aspect of yogi. Generally the description of a yogi is a person who is self-controlled but not weak. People who can speak less words but they are not weak. So what do you want to say on that?
Well, I mean, there's lots of different ways we could go. I mean, the translation of karma or kriya is literally action. Correct me if I'm wrong. So to take action. And like in a lot of the ancient Vedic texts and the Bhagavad Gita in specific, they talk about karma and karma yoga as sort of the path that we all should follow in order to achieve self-realization and in order to live a happy, productive life. So, you were just mentioning, sometimes um, yogis are sort of viewed as quiet or reserved, perhaps. And I think a big part of that might be that as we start to practice yoga, whether it's yoga asana or some sort of meditation or pranayama, breath work, we start to build a little bit more awareness of ourselves and of our actions in the world and how they affect the people around us and the space around us. And we start to become a little bit more, excuse me, we start to become a little bit more mindful, a little bit more aware of just ourself in space. And so rather than just being a little bit um, unaware and just pushing ourselves around and speaking out of turn and, you know, you see some people that are just sort of like they walk into a room and they just immediately fill up the space without even thinking about it. And a yogi someone that is more aware of themselves is usually a little bit more reserved because they're aware of the energetic interactions between themselves and others. So they take a step back, and instead of just like blurting something out or reacting right away to something that happens, you take a little bit of time, you take a breath, and you make an informed action, an informed response, rather than just an impulsive, instinctual reaction to whatever it is that might be. Does that make sense? What do you think about that?
No, that's a very good point, because the most of the times people think that speaking too much is a sign of knowledge. Uh,
Indeed.
but generally the actions speak louder than words. It is a very famous English proverb also. That- Coming to the next point, and you said the yogi looks inwards, not outwards. And in that they make the best decision, because generally we have seen that yogis develop a very fine intelligence, very subtle intelligence that helps them grasp things easier, makes it benefit in terms of, I've seen most of the students who practice meditation, they're generally top of the class, generally small kids, adults, because their intelligence is very fine tuned. And one thing I really love about American research is the focus on originality. And yoga in today's disturbed time is the best means for building or bringing out the original thought, because everyone has something unique to contribute. What do you have to add on that, please?
Indeed. You know, a good friend of mine years ago was traveling around the United States, doing lectures and sort of demonstrating yoga postures. He had recently achieved like a number one spot in the asana competitions that they hold every year. The whole number one in the entire world. And so he was traveling around teaching and demonstrating, sort of promoting yoga. And after his demonstration one day, somebody asked him what he had learned in in his journey to becoming a yoga champion, in his journey to like master his art of yoga asana. And just like we're talking about, like he took a moment and he looked inward, and you could see it happen. He was a very thoughtful person. He was Dutch, so he had a very proper way of speaking all the time. And he thought about it for a moment, and he looked up and he said, "You know, I think the greatest thing I learned in my yoga journey was how to learn." And it took a moment for that to sink in for everybody, because, you know, we spend our entire young life, quote unquote, learning, right? We go through kindergarten and grade school and then middle school and high school and college. You know, our first 20 something years on the planet, we're pushed through this system of learning. But are we really? Are we really learning, or are we just trying to memorize facts and regurgitate them? We're learning how to sit in chairs and follow the bell, and you know, it's a very antiquated technique of teaching. It's something that was developed in the 1800s, um, for people that were in the Industrial Revolution, and we've sort of moved past that in the world, but our learning system is still based on that. So his answer, "I learned how to learn," is very intriguing. You know, what about a yoga practice, whether it's, you know, practicing yoga postures or practicing meditation, whatever it is, what about that, You start to shift the gaze, like we were just saying, internally, and we start to notice ourselves and bring out our unique voice, our unique uh, view on the world and the people around us, and we start to be able to share that. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts that we can give to the world, is to really know ourselves and to take action, to do our karma or our kriya in that knowledge of ourselves.
You said a very great point here. Generally, in the Vedic curriculums, in the concept of Gurukul, and I think literally every yoga studio in America can be turned into Gurukul also, because it is individual driven. And the best learning happens when the teacher makes a connection with the pupil, with the student. And that's where the best learning happens. That is the most positive sign of Gurukul. In a way, also, in practically in all the major universities, one or two or three professors become actually the guru, because the pupils connect with them in a personal capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the character of the guru or the teacher is becomes primordial importance,
Right.
because that's where the pupil gains the confidence that what he's going to learn is not going to be just superficial, and those teachers are the most successful. So
Yep.
in a way, the Gurukul system always exists in the society, because it's always a teacher which leads the conversation. What do you have to add on that, please?
I agree. It's there. And that those connections, like I can remember back to my education, even before college, like there are teachers that, you just connect with. They're passionate and they care. And, they make a big difference in their students' lives. I think one of the biggest differences from, Vedic and even modern Indian sort of guru disciple relationships and what we have is the lack of respect and honoring that connection on both ends, but mostly from the student's perspective. Um, a guru is sort of, I don't think it's something that Westerners really comprehend, that word. It's a relationship where, there's so much trust and there's so much caring between the two that, like, literally the student would do anything for the guru and vice versa. Um, and here in the States, we don't really have that. It's sort of like, yeah, that's my teacher and I like them and off I go to the next thing. Um, there's a mantra that I learned fairly recently, the Shanti or the peace mantra, that was traditionally chanted in Vedic times before, any session where a teacher and a student would start to sit down and like practice or learn together. And it's pretty simple. It's, Om Sahana Lavatu Sahana Bunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Aditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. And it basically sets the mood between teacher and student. It's, let there be no animosity between us. May we be nourished. May we work together with great energy. Like, it's setting up how our relationship should be. And what an amazing thing! Like, imagine if, from grade school, everybody sat down and before we started our math or before we started our science or whatever subject we were going to study, everybody sat down and was just like, you set up a little contract. We're going to be nice to each other. We're going to respect each other. Let us work together to achieve a greater goal. Boom. The education system would, some students, the kids in America these days, might snicker at it or, whatever. But just the idea of setting a foundation like that would change the entire picture. What do you think about that?
You made a great point because generally the education system, the modern education system, is built on making money, and the guru and the student relationship is built on exchanging knowledge, where the guru imparts knowledge, shares his own experience. Knowledge doesn't mean information. Knowledge means science because it's experiential. People ignore the experiential science side of the science, because science is based on experience, not on theory. In Sanskrit it's called vigyan. Vigyan means a science. Now yoga is an experiential science. I always say it is an experiential science because a person can feel it, can see it, a transformation within. You also touched upon a very important point in the last question. You said regurgitate information. The education system, what I've seen is that there is a huge propaganda goes through the education system which a student may or may not relate to, and they are tested on it. Because the if you look at today's society is different than what was 10 years back, and so 10 years back information may not be relevant today. So once a student comes out of the education system, he has to unlearn everything what he learned and relearn everything. So it is makes it very irrelevant. But in the case of yoga and meditation, it builds up. Like the more years you spend doing it, you gain more knowledge. But you do not reject the past knowledge that you learned, because you continue, you build on those basics. And also the ancient education system was used to regard a student as well developed by the age of 14. The mindset is fully developed, and after that advanced studies go on and further research, but the basics always remain the same. So how useful is the current education system in developing a yogic mindset, or a what do you call it? I call it a practical, experiential, scientific mindset.
I'm not an expert by any means, but I will attempt to answer your question. Um, the like I was saying earlier, the modern education system, from what I've read, and again, not an expert, but it was set up sort of around the time of the Industrial Revolution and sort of made created in order to teach people how to, you know, work on a production line or, follow specific rules. And so you just think about like all our little classrooms where you sit down behind a desk and open a book, read, do a lesson, and then move to another classroom and do the same thing, following the bell. And for some people, that structure might work really well, and they might thrive in that environment. But for some people, I think a lot of people, especially now, that environment doesn't really work for them. And so, our current schooling system has just like one track, and there's no room for the people that are falling behind, or the people that are they like can't conform and can't really thrive in that environment. There's nowhere else for them to really go. So to your point, once they struggle and make it through that, then they have to sort of reset and unlearn a lot of the things that they were taught and try to make their way in the world. So is there a better way to educate people? Like, maybe to your point, like having a sort of a uniform education until we're 14. I think in Europe, maybe in France, they have something like this. Like, then you take sort of a test and maybe you go into a vocation. Maybe you're streamlined into higher education, or, so there could be different tracks for people and it would be better suited to them. I know there's been some conversation recently of bringing back the idea of apprenticeships and having people actually like study under someone and learn a trade. And there's something to be said for that. Maybe we don't all need to have a college degree, although, college is big business now, so they would disagree, I'm sure.
See, one of the in last 20 years or 30 years, we have seen a boom in yoga education. There are roughly, there's no official count because the yoga certification is not mainstream, even though some universities have tried to introduce a course on yoga. And whenever the universities try to build a course within them, because yoga is built on guru pupil relationship, it's not built on a formalized course where the person is not important,
Hmm.
and that cannot work in the yoga thing. So the that can introduce corruption again. Like you're saying that the knowledge is more important, person is not important, so the entire science goes out of the place. Because I'll give an example that San Diego is a city of Nobel laureates. You can meet Nobel laureates in a Starbucks coffee shop. It's so
Working
common
behind the
to,
counter, right?
yeah, encounters. You can
Yeah.
have, you go to La Jolla, any of the coffee shops, or near UCSD, you'll invariably bump into some Nobel laureate. And it's a very common thing here. And they work on guru disciple relationship, like, actually, because the Nobel laureate guides the research. Now that's a modern scientific thing. But
Hmm.
when the universities introduce the yoga education, they try to remove the personal aspect of it. And just like what happened with the other Vedic studies, the Vedic studies you cannot learn by a person who is not living it. It's not possible, because it's an experiential science. You have to experience it, feel it, and you have to live it. So do you think that will be a disservice to the yoga uh, as a tradition?
As a tradition, I think it is a little bit of a disservice. Um, there's a couple different ways to look at that. I think people building their knowledge of yoga and of the yoga system is not a bad thing, right? Like, if you want to get a master's in yoga therapy, or yoga studies, I mean, that's great. But at the end of the day, what is that going to do for you, other than, maybe you have a working knowledge of Sanskrit, or you have a really good idea of yoga history as we know it. But you're right, like the connection, the personal connection with a teacher, um, a guru, if you want to go that direction, is really important. There's a Sanskrit term, parampara, which basically means like an unbroken chain of teacher to student to teacher to student. Like, all the information, all the knowledge is passed down through a lineage. And there are some people out there that really dislike the idea of this lineage. Like, I'm not part of a lineage. I'm just a great teacher. Um, but when you're not connected to a lineage like that, you're sort of just out there making stuff up on your own. Where, I mean, that's what these lineages are for. Like, this knowledge and this information has been time tested over the course of hundreds, if not thousands of years. Some lineages reach back into the times of maybe even the Mahabharata, who knows? But, it's information, wisdom, knowledge that's been passed down from teacher to student the traditional way. And a lot of yoga tradition, Vedic tradition, originally was an oral tradition. It wasn't written down, it was passed down from person to person. Um, So to your point, like you can read about it in a book all day long, but until you actually start to practice it, it doesn't really mean much. And if you've ever tried to sit down and read one of the ancient or the older yoga texts, it's heavy. You have to like go back and read it like 20 times because you're like, what does this mean? A lot of the time, you need a teacher or a guru that can help you interpret it. All that knowledge, even if it's written down, for us to actually start to understand it and process it and apply it in our own lives, we need somebody to help us down that path.
Very good point you made actually. Gitopanishad. Gitopanishad is the Gita, Bhagavad Gita. It's also Sanskrit called Gitopanishad. The supreme instruction from the Veda is Gitopanishad. Now, it's spoken by Krishna. And there are many songs. Gita also means songs. There are many songs, but there is one unique song. It's a conversation with four people: Sanjay, Dhritarashtra, Krishna, and Arjun. Four people are talking. So the first question is asked by Dhritarashtra, what happened on the battlefield, to Sanjay. And the last one is replied by Sanjay to Dhritarashtra. He says, Yatra Yogeshwara Krishna, Yatra Partho Dhanudhara, Tatra Shri Vijay Bhutri, Dhruva Nitir Matir Mama. Wherever is Yogeshwar, now word Yogeshwar is very important, is made of two Sanskrit words, Yoga and Ishwar, means the God of all yogis. And the supreme practitioner of yoga is Shiva, because it's called Adi Yogi. Like he's always sitting in yoga samadhi or yoga asana. He's always sitting. And he's the supreme masculine figure of the world. Like there can be no more masculine than Shiva. It's not possible. So, and here we have Yogeshwar, the god of yoga. Now, when there is for yogis, most of the knowledge of today's yoga is coming from Bhagavad Gita. That makes it more authoritative. The word yoga, Sanskrit is called yoga, is in every single word, every part of Bhagavad Gita, yoga. And there are many teachers who separate that philosophical side and use yoga as Pilates, like Pilates, or is something else. But yoga is much more than Pilates in terms of flexibility and organs. Like it's more scientific in asanas to make your body healthy. But at the same time, there is a philosophical side to it. So when you say guru, you mentioned the word parampara, evam parampara prapten, evam rajarshayu vidu. I'm going to come a little bit next question on that. What is your view on this? Because people forget Adi Yogi, people forget Yogeshwar. And being a Sanskrit student, I will always remain a student. I can never be perfect in Sanskrit. But being a student of Sanskrit, these words are very important for me personally. So what is your view on that, sir?
What is the translation for that whole shloka you just said?
It said, wherever there is Yogeshwar Krishna, Yogeshwar, and wherever there is Arjun, there will be peace, prosperities, unmatched morality in the world. So now here the word Yatra Yogeshwar Krishna, Yatra Partha, and wherever there is Arjun. Now the Arjun is a Bhakto Sime Sakhacheti. He's a Bhakta. Now there's a huge propaganda against the word Bhakt also. People don't like the word Bhakta because they think that it's a blind following. It's not blind following. So what is your view on that?
Wherever there is Krishna, wherever there is Arjun. So, I just started leading a course at my school in Pittsburgh on the basics, the foundations of yoga philosophy, and we're using the Yoga Sutras as a guide. And even something as basic as that, as the first two limbs, the yamas and the niyamas that are referenced in the Yoga Sutras. People struggle with that. There's sort of a moral foundation that, it's sort of like how I treat other people in the world around me. And then the niyamas are sort of how I address myself, how I carry myself through the world. And the first yama, the first of 5 is ahimsa. It's nonviolence. And right there, from step 1, it's like Article 1, Section A, ahimsa. People take issue because we live in a culture, we live in a world, really, where violence is built into the system. And I'm going to wrap this back around to your question. At least I'm going to try. Even if, especially in America, even if you are a vegan, you don't eat any animal products whatsoever. So ahimsa has to do with not just other human beings. You don't do violence to other human beings, step 1. Excuse me. Step 2 is no violence to other beings in general, and that includes animals. Some people, some religions take it so far as to wear a face mask so they don't inhale microorganisms and do harm to them. But let's just take it down the line to animals. Like if you're eating another animal, another being, it's doing harm. And meat eating is a huge part of American society. So right there, there's an issue. But even if you're vegan, the way our culture is set up, the way our country is set up, meat eating and the dairy industry are subsidized. So our tax dollars go towards the beef industry, the dairy industry. So even if you're not actually eating that stuff, the money you pay to the government, because we don't have a say all the time in where our tax dollars go, some of it goes to the hamburger industry. And somebody pays $4 to eat a hamburger, but there's 7 other dollars that are just out there that tax dollars take care of. Same thing with dairy. So we have to figure out how to take care of other entities, other beings on the planet. What does that have to do with the greater picture, with yoga and Arjuna and Krishna, wherever they are on the planet? If we're just practicing yoga asana and we're using it as a workout, it's a good start. We're starting to be mindful. We're starting to become aware of our bodies, which is good. Like if we're in pain, if we have an injury or a chronic problem or whatever it is, it's hard to notice ourselves. It's hard to be kind to other people, other beings on the planet when we're suffering. And so yoga asana is a way to take the body and set it down a better path. So we're not struggling with our body all the time. We feel good and we can move around the planet better. Then we have the ability to start to figure out what's going on in our heads, in our head space. We start to be able to focus on things like nonviolence. So, bigger picture, when you start to practice yoga, and I think maybe that's what they mean by, when the presence of those greater beings is around, when we start to follow that same path, then, you know, things start to right themselves in the world around us. The problem is it's built into our culture, built into the very fiber of our country, that, you know, this violent acts and all these other things. You know, look at our politicians these days. There's like, you know, every other word out of their mouth is an untruth. The second yama is truthfulness. So if we can start to follow these, you know, little guidelines that are set up in the foundations of yoga, the whole world becomes a better place.
You mentioned a very interesting topic for me, the politicians, because
Yes.
evam parampara praptem imam rajarshayo vidu. So the Krishna comes down to retell the information of yoga to teach the kings, the politicians.
Right.
So,
The Kshatriyas, which the kings are, right, the sort of warrior class, their designation, their duty, their dharma on the planet is to protect. And if you look at all of us now, like the politicians are sort of at the head of, you know, they're in charge, but all of us now sort of have a responsibility to protect. Go on. I interrupted you.
no, the good point you said, their duty is to protect on the basis of dharma, which is righteousness, the right thing to do. Sometimes some things may be difficult for other people to understand, but they have to do right thing from the point of view of dharma. So yoga information, now imam is purposely meant for the ruling class also, because they often say that let the society be peaceful and let us be violent. Violence also means by words also, not just by weapons, can be by words also, or misguiding people, or just like you said, the like I have a very common joke in rest of the world, the democracy means by votes. In USA it means by money, how much money you can raise, and that's what translates into votes here. Now the uh, so how important it is for the politicians to become a yogi.
That's a question for me?
Yeah.
I If our politicians actually started to practice yoga philosophy, the world would be a better place. I think it's highly important. Do they have to be able to put their leg behind their head or balance on one leg or do a handstand? No. Does anybody, for that matter? Uh, the the idea of yoga has been intertwined with asana in our country. And asana yoga postures are wonderful. And like I was saying earlier, they help us focus our mind, they help us feel better. But there's an idea out there that to be a good yogi, we have to have these advanced yoga postures mastered. Otherwise, why do yoga? And it's so much more than that. And the foundations of yoga, like I was just saying, nonviolence, truthfulness, non-stealing, you know, not coveting, not being greedy. There are all these foundations that really should be taught first. They should be taught in kindergarten and all the way through grade school. They should be sort of like the foundations of our society. And if they were, and if especially our leaders, our politicians, the ones that we put in charge of our country, if they followed that, man, we would be in different circumstances right now. But everybody is out for themselves and trying to make money and trying to stay in power. And so we can't get anything done.
The world's greatest warrior the world has ever seen, Arjun, in last 6,000 years, he was also a yogi, and that title was going to be Pulastya Rishi. Not only was good with weapons but also a great yogi, because You take any soldier, good soldier in the world, like who's fighting as per dharma, they're very peaceful, very, very peaceful. I met one General Comstock here in San Diego. He was a US, I think, second in line, and he retired, and he met me. I asked him that who will be scared of you? You're such a gentleman. Who will be scared of you? Like you are the top brass of the US Army, but he was such a gentleman, very kind-hearted, good, and actually, by the way, he also practices meditation. Also, if he's listening, he can vouch for it. But he said the most important thing for a soldier is to control his emotions. He said very important thing, and he said that a soldier can always be a good politician if he controls his mouth.
Right.
Basic principles of yoga, satyam priyahitam anudvega karam vakyam, like you should not speak agitating words, you should always speak pleasing words, beneficial words, and truthful words, the basic foundation of yoga.
Hmm.
Now, Prime Minister of India, he put Yoga Day, 21st June, as World Yoga Day as per UN, and it is celebrated in 165 countries, or all the countries of the who are part of the United Nations now. And so you actually answered the point that just asana doesn't make you a yogi. The principles that you apply in your life and the karma that you do makes you a yogi. Asanas are important in doing that, but asana doesn't define that you are a yogi or you're not a good yogi. So your actions speak louder than words always. So the what is the message you want to give to all these politicians that who want to number one, I always tell politicians is that 55 million Americans practice yoga. If you become a yogi and you like try to get votes on that basis, you have a larger audience, because these yogis don't vote in any election generally, because there is nothing they can relate to. So do you think it can be a major source of creating good leaders also? Because a yogi can be a good leader because he is a good follower. That is the first quality of a leader, is he's a good follower, a good student. What do you have to add on that?
I mean, you only have to look so far as Mahatma Gandhi, right? Uh, I was just rereading the autobiography of a yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda, and he, in his book, he describes when he went to visit Gandhi in India, and they sit and have many conversations, and the two of them are connecting on a higher spiritual level. But at one point, you know, Gandhi did all sorts of hunger strikes, and was always practicing nonviolence, and changing the course of an entire country just by following his principles, yogic principles. And Yogananda at one point asks him about the idea of nonviolence. And when you start to really dig into this concept, there are fine layers of it. It's like, we were talking about warriors and soldiers. Sometimes you have to do acts of violence in order to protect, in order to do like greater good. Violence has to be a part of the recipe, the formulation. But Yogananda was asking Gandhi about his idea of ahimsa, of nonviolence. If he were confronted by a cobra, by a snake, and the snake was about to bite him, he was like, "What would you do?" And Gandhi just sort of like rolled back and laughed and was like, "I still couldn't harm the cobra. I would send it good energy, I would send it love, but at the end of the day, I couldn't do harm." And that was the kind of person he was. He was always following his principles, always following this higher standard. And an entire country got behind him, millions of people, and they changed the course of the country. So if a politician decided to actually practice yoga and actually follow those principles and stick to them, could they make a difference? At least I hope so. In this modern age, who knows? But Yogananda said once, a person that can reform themselves can reform thousands. And that was before social media. What do you think about that?
Very good point. I think most of the Indians won't agree with Mahatma Gandhi today because most of the Indians, they think that he was a British implant to weaken them.
Huh.
And the Subhash Chandra Bose is the one who defeated British, and to some extent historically is correct also, because that was not the forte of Mahatma Gandhi historically, but he has been made the icon in the West as well as in India. He's a big icon in the West. There are many good things he said. I really value that. Now the next point, which, and this will be the last point in today's discussion, I think many of you are loving it, and since because all of you are staying back, uh, the last point in today's discussion is the the two qualities of a yogi are pranipatena, pariprashnena, like the humble service to the guru or the teacher. It's not a requirement, you're not forced to do it. No blind following, I don't encourage anything blind. But a submissive attitude to learn, and the second is with an attitude to actually implement asking questions, not just asking questions. Like, you don't ask a guru or a teacher, what is the price of potatoes? You're not going to ask that. Or what should I do now? That's not the point of yoga. Yoga is makes you intelligent. Like I always say, yoga doesn't tell you what to do. Yoga lets you find out yourself. What do you have to add on that?
I love that. The back to the idea of the guru, the student teacher relationship. I think many, probably most Americans sort of recoil, they cringe a little bit at the idea of being humble and serving someone else, because it's not what we do, right? We're strong individuals and we have to take care of ourselves. So it's not really built into our culture. But I believe it's really important, especially if you want to have that sort of relationship with a teacher, to be able to be humble. And being humble doesn't mean being meek or, I don't know, being subservient. Being humble is just like releasing yourself from the concept that you always have to be the most important person in the room. And that's so freeing. And when we humble ourselves and actually start to serve, whether it's our teacher or our community, it's a huge step. Being of service. Like some of my teachers say that's actually our nature. That's what we're here for, is to be of service. And so it's sort of like flipping the entire story around, because most of our upbringing and most of our culture tells us that it's all about us, that it's very egotistic. It's very me, me, me. I've got to push and do better and go further and make all the money and have the fancy car and whatever. That's the story we're told. But if we can flip the coin and take a step back from that and figure out how to be of service to others, it's so much more fulfilling. It's so much more rewarding. And it makes you that much more fulfilled as a person. Does that answer the question?
Yes. And there'll be a lot more discussion, so we'll cover many other points also. A very
Excellent.
interesting definition I learned about humility was to not be anxious for the satisfaction of being honored by others. and
Excellent.
and the moment you practice that, you automatically are humble, because you're not looking for honor, because sometimes we have to speak the truth. We have to say it. We may sound arrogant, but when we say Sattology versus mythology, we have to say it. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean I'm arrogant, but I'm saying prove me wrong. And
And when we approach our teachers in that mood of service, then we really start to build a relationship. All the information, all the wisdom that they've gained over their lifetime and the lifetimes of their teachers, there starts to be a transfer when we humbly ask, you know, how can I be better? What's the purpose of life, or whatever it is that we ask our teachers. Again, if we approach them in that mood of service rather than like, you need to tell me right now because I need to, whatever it is, however the modern education system works.
thank you so much, Zeb. You practice it, and therefore you can speak it, and that's the beauty. And all the yogis who are watching it, and you are learning from it, you can say thanks to Zeb. It's Yoga Factory at Pittsburgh. You can approach him, zebyoga.com. And also you can also approach him via Facebook, via Instagram, through websites. And I wish Yoga Factory was in every city of the USA.
Maybe we can make that happen. You mentioned the Native American temples and holy sites at the beginning of the program, and something that I've been working on and just released information on is a trip at the beginning of next year to Machu Picchu and the Sacred Valley in Peru. So if anyone's interested in that,
Uh,
please get in
Count
touch.
me in. I would love to come.
Excellent.
Thank you all for watching, and do watch it on YouTube and let us know your feedback. We'll come up with some more specific, getting into deep dive in some other future sessions. Namaste.
Namaste.